Okay, as far as the light, with the Neurolight, there are two kinds of light that we're using. One is the flashy stuff, which is superluminous LEDs in the cool blue-white range, meaning very high energy, very short wavelengths of light.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the nasal light that goes in the nasal passage, so we call it the nasal light. These are not LEDs, they're low-level lasers, soft lasers, 5 milliwatt. And that red color is a very long wavelength and has a very high degree of tissue penetration. We're not aiming for cells themselves in this case. We're not aiming for brain cells. We're aiming for the blood because the capillary network in the nasal area is so dense and the mucosa is basically translucent. It's not transparent, but almost transparent, that it's very easy for the long wavelengths of red light to go into the blood.
Okay.
There's been a lot of theory and now some very elegant research that shows that the primary mechanism is likely that the light source creates a structuring of the watery plasma base in the blood. You can refer to Gerald Pollack's work, which is elegant. He popularized it with a kind of demanding book called The Fourth Phase of Water, and it's been recently published. He calls it easy water, E and Z, because of the full name being exclusionary zone. And I won't go into the details of that, but there's strong evidence now that water structures easily and is typically structured in the body, and that it's a fourth phase. There are different ways of triggering this structuring, and one of the ways is thermal activation, which is the essence of light, energy at that wavelength, so that there's the red light, long wavelength, penetrates into the blood, and that the watery plasma base is quickly and instantly structured. It'll maintain that structuring for a good period of time, and one of the characteristics of the structured water is that it takes on a negative charge, so that now it has a charge, it has an electron to donate, and as the blood flows through the body, any areas of cellular demand for increased mitochondrial ATP, that this charge offloads into the cell, stimulates the mitochondria, and you get an increase of ATP. So that's the reason why in the design of the Neurolight, there's a brain gym, brain food, and brain skills. That's based on the requirements of a complex adaptive system. A complex adaptive system is self-regulating if it has enough energy and if the connections are efficient. So the brain gym aspect, the brain exercises are meant to strengthen connectivity in the brain, increases capacity, along with the brain food that creates a source of supplementary ATP. So the combination of brain exercise for connectivity, brain food for supplementing energy works to increase the brain's capacity to match new demands. The new demands are in the brain skills. So the brain skills are the self-regulation aspect of a complex adaptive system, also known as the brain. In order to have a high probability of learning, matching these demands, there has to be enough capacity. So you use brain gym exercises and brain food supplementation to build capacity. Once you have capacity at a high enough level, then you can bring in demand, because the demand should never be greater than the capacity. One of the ways to decrease the probability of integrating the new learning is that the new learning has a demand level much higher than the capacity of the brain. So if you want to build capacity, that's brain gym and brain food. If you want to then introduce demand for new learning, those are the brain skills. So for persons that have low capacity, we could say low vitality, because it kind of demonstrates itself as low vitality. And you can recognize that, just like a facial, eye, body language, voice. You can have a sense of capacity. Okay? So instinctively, you know that you really don't want to create a demand that exceeds their capacity, because a positive process ends up creating a negative response. Because they can't go there. It's a good thing that you want them, it's a good place where you want them to go, but the demand is greater than their capacity to go there. So with persons that have a relatively positive degree of vitality, you can go into the brain skills a lot sooner, and you can work there more creatively and more liberally, because you have demands that probably are okay for their capacity. And you would note that even in the brain skills, that they're all organized as foundation level demand, intermediate level demand, advanced level demand. That when I composed them, I knew that some were more demanding than others. Like if you're learning, like a dance step, a simple waltz is not that demanding, right? On the other hand, like an advanced tango can be very demanding, right? So, or you go into a yoga center, and there are classes for beginners, intermediate, and advanced, because it's relative to capacity. So hello you.
She's one of mine.
Hey Meg.
I'm one of her followers.
Yeah, no, not Meg. I thought it was Meg.
Anina.
Hi, I'm Anina.
What is it?
Anina.
Anina.
Yeah.
I'm Garnet.
Pleasure to meet
You're
you.
the first Anina that I've met, ever.
Maybe the last.
Maybe. Okay. All right. So we're recording right now. So
Okay, sorry,
I'll
sir.
keep on talking. In the world of neurolite theory and in the world of neurolite practicals, applications, this is, other than the fundamentals of neuroplasticity with things like attention and so on, this is the base. This is how you know how to get good results and how to get bad results, or not get good results, is if you don't appreciate capacity and demand. It's why the neurolite is designed with these three elements, because this is the nature of a complex adaptive system. It'll self-regulate. If you support it in self-regulation, if you present information, news of difference, all these kinds of news of change, if you do that, it'll do it. It'll work. It'll match the demands. That's kind thinking. You can match the demand because the capacity is sufficient. But if the vitality, I'm speaking technically, if the capacity is insufficient, you're wasting your time, their time, and you have the potential of creating rebounding reactions because you're trying to push the system into demands when there's not enough capacity to match the demand. If you make me, if it's healthy to run 5 miles at a quick tempo, and you try to make me run 5 miles today at a quick tempo, I'm going to have a very negative reaction physically, let alone my attitude towards you, right? Because I don't have the capacity for it. Is it healthy? Some people will say yes. If they have the capacity and the habit of doing it, yeah, it sustains it at quite a high level of metabolism. But I can't do that. So if you present to the brain signals of a certain characteristic, coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength, in the brain gym you have isolated exercises that I'll explain more so you understand why you use them. Those features, coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength, those are used to create the compositions. And the compositions will use, say, more modest levels of coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength. And then the intermediate ones, more, and the advanced even more than that. So think of it as learning dance steps. You know, if you don't have, if you really haven't practiced anything that towards agility, coordination, and you're stiff as a board, you're not flexible, and your stamina is poor, your endurance, and your muscles are weak, and you try to teach a flamenco, or in pairs, like an advanced tango, you can't do it. You won't be able to learn it, you won't be able to integrate it, because you don't have the current capacity. Now, it isn't across the board. Maybe you are flexible enough, you know, maybe this, maybe that, but
You can unlock it.
it's okay. We're doing a sort of a pause, but okay. What we had thought was we're going to take. They'd like a lunch break at 1 o'clock for a half an hour. It's almost 1:45. So take a drink of water. Okay, what I'm going to do right now. You can go ahead. What I'm going to do right now, and I'll do it briefly, is I'm going to explain the exercises in the brain gym. Okay? So you'll understand more of what they are beyond a name. One thing that you'll recognize is if you go into the brain gym. Give me a second. I think this is still running. Okay. You can see this more or less. And it's okay, I'll do it like this. It's not so important for the video, it's more important for you guys. Okay, the brain food is the separate unit that goes in your nose. It's much easier to use a separate unit instead of engineering it into the other piece. So that's why it's separate. But the concept of the Neurolite is those three elements. Brain food and brain gym to build capacity, and brain skills to create demands for new learning. Okay, so if I go into the brain gym and I touch training, what you'll see is that you have a choice as to what degree of demand in the training. I can work at a foundation level, an intermediate level, or an advanced level. That's like going into a big gym and there are 3 doors, right? The analogy is weak, right? This door is for beginners, this door is for intermediate, this door is for advanced, right? So you go in and you see that coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength are the 4 types of exercise. I mean, let's face it, if a person is low capacity in general, you're probably going to be using the foundation or the beginner's classes a lot because they need it. When I began using the Neurolite for myself, because I did all the design, all that, you would think, oh, I'm going to be using the most advanced stuff. No. You know, I'm a 67-year-old man of relatively good health, but I know that I need support in a lot of fundamental levels. If you don't even think about my brain, think about my body. I've been a graceful person throughout my life, but I'm less graceful now. I sense it, I feel it. The way I would do something, you know, whether, I mean, like stumbling or something, it's not really an example, you know what I mean. I know that that's getting less. And flexibility, I'm certainly less flexible. Yes, I'm talking about my soma, what you see, but what's happening in and with your brain and what's happening in your soma are almost identical. Almost identical. Not identical, but almost. What about endurance? Oh, for sure, I have much less stamina than I had before. Although I can, like presentations like this, I can sustain like a laser for long periods of time, but I'm less able in other situations. So, okay. And then what about strength? Yeah, I'm much less strong than I used to be. Okay, you see that I try to model these for the brain with principles that people are easily recognizing. It's not like sophisticated neuroscience, right? Okay, what is coordination? Coordination, again, like that dance machine. You've seen, I'm totally fascinated by them now.
I'm going to get you a
Like,
Christmas.
like in the arcades, well, we had them for, for the girls for a while. They had one, But the idea is that it shows you on screen or the thing lights up how you have to do the dance step, right? So this is like making the brain dance, right? That's what these exercises do. They're brain dances. And if it's coordination, foundation, you just kind of go 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. That you coordinate a simple sequence of signal responses, right? And you train the brain to do that degree of change and maintain coordination. It can follow the frequency, it follows it. Then for intermediate, I increase the degree of the change. And can you do that without being clumsy? You can do the step. What happens if the step is a little bit wider? Same dance step, but the distance is increasing. So can you do the same step, the same signaling, but with increased degree of change? So coordination focuses on increasing or decreasing degrees of change in the signal set. So right now, you're hearing my voice, and if my voice goes and comes down again, the pitch changed. Can you follow the change in the signal in the pitch? Or if the light started to change in your light to dark to dark to light to light to dark, can your brain stay with signals that are changing by different degrees? And that's what coordination does. It exercises that degree of change. The second one, flexibility, is that you have the same degree, but the pattern is not so linear. It becomes more complex. So instead of me, to use the analogy, instead of me doing just simple steps to the side, I would do some steps that go forward and back and side to side. The degree of change is the same, but the pattern of change is more complex. So the flexibility deals with increasing or degrees of complexity. The first one is the simple degree of change. Let's make it a distance, like 12 inches, 24, 12 inches, 24, but it's linear. What about 12 inches, but in an L shape, instead of just a side to side? So the amount of change is the same, but the degree of complexity starts to change. So you're working with complexity. The third one, endurance, is the same thing as coordination, but it's the speed of the change, the rate of change, not the degree of change, but the rate of change. So if I taught you a dance step that you could do slowly, now I want you to do that same dance step fast. Can you do that? Right?
I think that's you, Dad.
Oh. Okay, just leave it play out. I'm sorry, my cell phone is on. So the number 4 is the rate of change, right? Can you keep up with the dance and brain signaling? And some people, they say, I feel like my brain is slowing down. I mean, it's a very common term to reflect a subjective experience that seems to be one that is metric. You can measure it, right? It's hard to measure the degree, hard to measure well, some people say, I don't know, that's too complicated. That they actually say that they can't process complexity as well as before. But the most common is the rate of processing. They say, I feel like my brain is slowing down. I feel like I understand it, but you have to explain it more slowly, and I'll get it. Then the last one is strength. And that's whether you're able to integrate increasing degrees of intensity in the signal. And oftentimes people say, you know, I can't tolerate, it's like noise now, the sound. Can you please like turn the lights down a little bit, they're too bright, or you know, the music is too loud, or keep the kids quiet, I can't concentrate. The person's brain is less able to integrate higher degrees of signal intensity. So I broke these down like this because these are the typical 4 categories of advanced athletic training. These are the typical 4 categories that are used in training in the military. That it's recognized that coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength. The oldest one in exercise was always strength, weightlifting, right? Then aerobics became fascinating because of endurance, stamina. And then yoga becomes increasingly popular because of flexibility. And I can tell you that from my experience, famously, high-level athletes, generally speaking, hate to stretch. They'll say, okay, I did it, that's enough, or I won't do it. You know, you see like in basketball or something before, they'll do like, you know, it's like, you know, if I don't do this, they'll fire me, so I'll do it, but I really don't want to do it. The most recent one to evolve is agility training. Fast reaction response. And this is one of the ones that is most developed in military training, where people have to perform high-rate, almost reflexive actions under stress with fatigue, with very complicated high-power machinery, some of them weapons, some of them vehicles. So are you able to do that? And in the brain, this is a bit abstract, if I had to take all of this away and just give one button for brain training, brain gym, right? Mm-hmm. Capacity training. Not, you know, I would say, number 1, use a nasal light, because every process that has an increased demand needs more energy. So I would supplement with that, and then if brain gym was one button, doink, I would choose foundation coordination. Because the biggest demand on the brain, because of its incredible complexity of simultaneous signals, is to coordinate them. If they're not coordinated, nothing is working. Everything is bumping into each other. It's not sequencing properly. Strength, every one of them is valuable, but you know, forced to a singularity. When you have a system that is an innumerable number of interrelated elements that are signaling simultaneously in all kinds of ways, signal coordination has the biggest effect to increase positive outcome or decrease the natural state.
Can you help me understand maybe it's a subtle difference or a big difference between coordination and flexibility? Is flexibility just an increased ability to coordinate?
That's reasonable, I would say, because you know the spatial analogy I give is that you go in coordination, you go left to right by a certain degree, 12 inches, 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 12 inches. And then to increase the demand for that, it would be 12, 24, 12, 0, 12, 24, 12, 0. But the pattern is very simple. In flexibility, it's always 12, but it may be 12 to the right, and now 12 forward, 12 back, 12 to center. So the degree of the change is the same, but the complexity of the pattern increases. So one is complexity of the dance step gets more complicated, even though how far you step is the same.
So increased complexity of the coordination.
Yes,
Okay.
that's reasonable. Yes.
I-
Actually, each one develops on the other, because the endurance is the same pattern but faster or slower, and strength is the same pattern but with a stronger or less strong signal. So but if you can't coordinate it to begin with, it's hopeless. Yes.
It seems like the coordination could be thought of in two-dimensional terms, and the flexibility in 3 dimensions.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, here I'm doing it, by left and right, left, right, forward, back. You can think, we tend to think in terms of time and space, and signaling does have a very clear time element. There's only a certain rate of neuronal discharge, they're called the refresh rate, right? They can only signal on and off so fast. Spatially is a lot more challenging because there's a three-dimensionality to the brain, but then you've got this degree of related significance, and that degree of related significance is something we can't imagine in the brain because I've read and I've been told in very reliable sources that if you take if I'm trying to remember the numbers because they're preposterous anyway, in 1 cubic millimeter of brain tissue, which is really small, there's something like 10,000 synaptic junctions. I don't remember if that's the right number.
No,
it's probably
it was higher.
It's more.
You said billion.
Well, it's something
It's
like
probably million.
yeah. Anyway, a lot of zeros, right? So when you look at the overall volume or say mass of the brain, and if 1 cubic millimeter has that many interconnections, the issue of three-dimensionality is exponentially expanded because of the degree of significance between the conversations. And this is the staggering divinity of self-regulation, where the brain doesn't have a brain. A rainforest doesn't have a boss tree. And not only does the complex adaptive system have more parts and pieces than you can count, how many trees in the rainforest? But they're all interacting and interrelating with each other. So that there is this, obviously the most famed saying, sort of popularized saying, is that the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. The whole of the brain is much greater than the sum of its structural and even structural parts and functional actions. That's why, it's, by our own declared ignorance, it's the most complex thing we've ever discovered so far. The brain is preposterous. The human genome project is finished, and if you sequence just these 4 things, they say if you print them in linear sequence with a normal font and a normal line spacing, it takes about 1 million pages in the book. The book would be 1 million pages. And now, it's 3 years old now, but now it's not the human genome project, it's the human Connectome project, trying to map the connections. The field is called Connectome harmonics. It's just such a gorgeous name, Connectome harmonics. And, they're trying to get even the basics. And of course, this is an almost absurd extrapolation, but they say it looks like if we were able to map all of the interconnections, the connectome, not the genome, the connectome of the human brain, and printed it like we would in that imaginary book, the genome book was a book of 1 million pages. It would take 1 million of those books to map the human brain connectome. Now, obviously, they're kind of estimating it. But this is the thing, why we tend to think in terms of time and space. which is very reasonable. Complex adaptive systems like this have a defying quality of the increasing or decreasing degree of significance. And that's why we work from possibility to probability. But we never know actuality until the moment when it manifests. You'll never know for sure which horse is going to win the race until it crosses the finish line. Of course, in Vajrayana Buddhism, this is the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. You know, this kind of dynamic has been well recognized and expressed differently over time. But, you know, this is the brain. So that's why I describe the brain skill sessions, the compositions, the ones that have new learning demand. For people using the language, I say what you're doing is you're creating probability states. You know, when you give a lesson in school, there's no certainty that the student is going to integrate the lesson. It's by higher and lower degrees of probability that they will. But you have to understand that there are a lot of variables in this equation. In mathematics, as soon as you get more than 3 variables, you can't predict the outcome of the equation. So, possible, things are made a lot, you take out of possibility and you become, like if you bring in the brain skill session for new learning, it's going to have a much higher probability of success if, number one, it's reinforced, but even before that, if the demand is not too much greater than the capacity. That's why sometimes, for the people that need the most, you're going to spend most of your time in the brain gym and brain food. Because they have a very low probability of integrating the demands of new learning. So it may not seem very exotic or very sexy or anything to be, because you know the signal sets in the brain gym are really simple. You know, maybe you want to be playing tennis, but the fact is you've got to be sitting there and doing your stretching exercise.
But that's what's missing.
But that's why you can't play tennis well. That's why you don't want to play tennis. You know, but that's what's missing. And the person will increasingly feel better, better, better. They manifest better, better. They report better, better. And everything else that you were doing before as an adjunctive, better result, better result, better result. It's like, well.
I know a doctor who worked with a man who had a very debilitating stroke.
Yes.
And she had him just crawling on the floor.
Yeah.
And then learning to eat again and relearning all of the steps as we do as humans.
Yeah.
And because the patterns were already there, and instead of jumping ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, this is the beauty of increased understandings of neuroplastic behavior, because the more we understand it, the more our methods become refined, they become more efficient. You realize oftentimes why something that should work